you a lot more about his experience. And we also have Arthur Miller, who is the Northwest Regional Organizer for the Leonard Peltier Offense-Defense Committee. So we want to thank them, and we're just going to start this quick, and whoever wants to.
Yeah, excuse me, I have to stand up when I speak. I'm a street speaker. Those that know me understand that. Well, it's nice to see everybody here. Good evening. In this country, we're told throughout its history that there are American interests and American way of life and American this and everything, and anybody that speaks out against that must not love America. Well, this is one of the things that we got to start taking back, because any country, any land, any nation is also the people, and it's also the land. And these people that yell at us all the time about American interests, and if you don't love America, get out, which have yelled at me many times, they're only talking about the interests of just a few people. And everybody that speaks up about any other interests gets targeted. And since the early part of the last century, the United States has had a political police force that has targeted people who spoke out against the policies and interests of this elite few, people that tried to organize for a better way of life. That organization, that political police force, was the FBI, or as some of us like to refer to it, the Federal Bureau of Intimidation. They started out within the first 6 months of the FBI having files on 250,000 people. One of its first goals was to help crush a labor union of poor, unskilled workers, the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies. Then they went on to try to crush the civil rights movement, people asking for their basic freedoms. But that was not in the agenda of the power elite. So their political police force harassed and intimidated those people. There are large books written on what the FBI did to Dr. Martin Luther King and many other activists. We know these things. Then the FBI turned its attention on to the peace movement. The very idea that people would stand up and say the most horrendous thing that humanity has ever done to humanity, murder themselves on a battlefield, is wrong, was somehow not in the interest of the American power structure or the American way of life. Somehow we didn't love America because we didn't want our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters sent off someplace to be sacrificed and killed on a foreign land, and killed by people that are just like us. Every day those people of those other lands get up, go to work, feed their families. Their interests are the same, providing for the well-being of their people. They're no different than us. What's different is the political interests. Then later they went after radical journalists. And that's where my story comes in. My first involvement or being targeted by the FBI was in San Diego in the early 70s. We put out a radical newspaper, which was a IWW union paper. We had a circulation of 10,000 weekly, in which we talked about the peace movement, which we talked about racism and sexism. Matter of fact, that paper was divided up in parts. Black Community News Service had a section. The Brown Berets had a section called El Barrio. The Radical GIs had a section called Dare to Struggle. And the women had a section also. All these people coming together and saying, our freedom is important. And they decided that we were not part of the American way. So they targeted us. I was arrested 6 times in 1970 because of that harassment. We were shot at, we were bombed, our cars were destroyed. We were constantly threatened. We were constantly spotlights in our windows. And then they decided to work with a right-wing organization called the Minutemen. This is not the same Minutemen that you know of today. This was a paramilitary or right-wing organization back in those days. But these Minutemen were not radical enough for them. They were not great enough terrorists. So what the FBI did is they created a new terrorist organization called the Secret Army Organization. And those people shot at us and continued, but they escalated the terrorism against us. Now, all our struggles, no matter where you come, no matter what you do, may seem singular to you. And the media and everything sort of kind of portrays that. But to them, to the FBI, to the people in power, we're all the same. We're dissidents. We are people that want something better for our families, for our way of life, for our communities. Now, a good example of the FBI frame of mind when it comes to different communities was one particular FBI agent, Special Agent Richard Held. Now, this person started off in Chicago. He was involved in the cover-up and murder of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton. Then he moved to Los Angeles and was involved in the suppression of the Black Panther Party and all the things behind it. If you know that story, there were a lot of things that the FBI did behind it. After that, he came down to San Diego, and he was involved in the suppression of the Panthers down in San Diego. Then he turned his focus on peace activists and radical journalists. They particularly disliked the paper that I worked with because we got into muckraking stories. We exposed the local politicians and big business in the corruption that was going on in that time. One example was Nixon's biggest campaign contributor, C. Arnold Smith, was arrested at that time, eventually, through the information we put out, for the biggest tax evasion case in the history of this country. He got so broke that he ended up suing his ex-wife for alimony. And San Diego was so full of corruption. Where I first met Peter back in those days was, I don't know if it was his first place, but one of the places was the San Diego Convention Coalition, and he'll probably mention that too, where the corruption that was exposed there got the convention moved out of San Diego. So Richard Held targeted us. And Richard Held was the overseer of the Secret Army Organization. Well, when he got done with that, he went to Pine Ridge. And he was involved in the suppression of the traditional Lakotas and Leonard Peltier. After he got done with that, he went to Puerto Rico, where he was involved in the suppression of Puerto Rican independence movement. And after that, he went to San Francisco Bay Area, where he was involved in the bombing of Judy Berry, who was a Earth First Wobbly, organizing Redwood Summer. Here was this one man, this one FBI agent that showed all the connections that a lot of times we don't make. He understood it. It's time that we understand it. Now, the situation with Leonard is critical. It's critical for every single activist in the United States. And the reason why it is this is one time we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that an activist was framed and set up by the government for corporate interests. We can prove this. We have proved it many times. What happened on the Pine Ridge Reservation after Wounded Knee, well, before Wounded Knee, was that the government did a secret satellite survey of Wounded Knee, and they found an area in the northwest section of the reservation that had high-grade uranium. Well, the one thing that they knew in wanting to get that uranium was that the traditional Lakota people would not surrender any more of their land. They had refused to take money for the Black Hills that had been stolen 100 years before then. They sure the hell weren't going to take any money for more land being stolen. So they knew that they had to suppress the traditional people. So they went about doing that. On the day of the firefight for Leonard, that Leonard was involved in, Dickie Wilson, a tribal chairperson that won election through a fraudulent tribal election that was helped staged by the FBI, was in Washington, D.C. signing away, illegally signing away that section of the reservation. At the same time that was what happened to Leonard happened. Roads were blockaded in the area where Leonard was. Leonard was in an encampment on the Pine Ridge Reservation in an area called the Jumping Bull Compound. They were there because after Wounded Knee, there was this terrorist death squad campaign against traditional Lakota people, and AIM members were over 66 traditional people and AIM members have been murdered in 2.5 years. The traditional people, elders, and whatnot asked AIM to come back in, and they set up an encampment there. The day before the shootout, the FBI had come there saying that they were looking for a young boy by the name of Jimmy Eagle for allegedly stealing a pair of used cowboy boots. What apparently happened was that there was some sort of drunken fight between teenagers, and one guy stole somebody else's shoes. So the FBI assigns these 2 agents to this very important case. All the murders were not very important, but this case was essential. These 2 agents were counterintelligence agents and members of the FBI SWAT team that they were sending after this young teenage boy for these boots. Well, that was the excuse that they used to move in on the Jumping Bull compound that day, because they said they thought that Jimmy Eagle was there. They said that he apparently came in a red pickup truck. Later they changed it to a red van because Leonard happened to own a red van. And the FBI said that these FBI agents didn't know the difference between a panel van and a pickup truck. Well, everybody here knows the difference. Everybody knows the difference, but those, I guess they had a little lack of education or something. The local hospitals were warned before anything happened that morning to expect casualties. So they knew something was going to happen on that day. The reason why it was a firefight and not something like Wounded Knee is that they did not want a situation that would last for very long like Wounded Knee did, which lasted for 73 days. They wanted something that was quick, that they could suppress AIM and hopefully suppress the resistance against the stealing of this section of Pine Ridge Reservation. Well, the firefight happened. These agents, instead of stopping this truck out on the highway that they said had this very dangerous criminal who allegedly stole a pair of used cowboy boots that they slowly followed out from town, as soon as that pickup truck got in and got parked in there, they come hauling in at full blast, pull up in a defensive position, and come out with their guns drawn. And a firefight occurs. Well, in that firefight, it's unfortunate that in anything that happens in struggles, that people die. 2 FBI agents did die that day, and one AIM warrior by the name of Joe Stunts Kilsroy. But we say that those responsible for the deaths of those FBI agents is not the AIM members that were in that encampment that day, but it was the higher-ups in the FBI that sent those people in there knowing that a firefight would occur, because they came in the same way all the drive-by shootings have been happening on Pine Ridge. They knew that would happen, that they were there to defend the people, so they knew it was going to happen. They are the ones that are responsible for it, not Leonard. Well, everybody except the one slain warrior got away that day. somehow, because they had over 200 agents there in a little over an hour. Leonard made it to Canada. 2 AIM members were caught and put on trial in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and we all thought that this trial that they didn't have a chance. Here was this middle America town with a middle America jury, and God, what chance do we have? So they just presented the truth, and they were found not guilty for reason of self-defense. Okay, when they found Leonard in Canada, they extradited him by lying to the Canadian government, giving false affidavits to the Canadian government that they knew were false from a woman who said that she had seen Leonard do that. Later, when she got away from the FBI, she came to the defense and asked if she could testify for Leonard, and the judge refused to allow her to testify, saying that if she was to be believed, she would shock the conscience of the court. God, can you imagine any trial where your witness is denied the right to testify because they might shock the conscience of the court by telling the truth? That is simply amazing. Well, Leonard's trial had been moved up to Fargo, North Dakota, and was given to a judge who had a long history of right-wing views and anti-native views. How that trial was moved up there, nobody knows. It was actually illegal as far as court procedures goes, because it should have gone back to the original judge. Well, Leonard was not allowed to put any evidence on for self-defense or anything like that. So he was found guilty. In that trial, to connect him to the deaths of those agents, the FBI fabricated ballistics reports. Later, through the Freedom of Information Act, we found out about the fabrication. Now, when it went in front of an appeals court and went back to the original judge, the FBI said, in the original trial, I just misspoke. What happens to any of us if we misspeak on the stand? We go to prison. But no, that was okay. So Leonard has been denied a new trial for all these years, even though at this point, the government says they don't know who shot the agents. They don't know Leonard's involvement in it, that Leonard was just there that day. That's all they know. That's all he's convicted for. And if you think for a moment, the first 2 AIM warriors that were found guilty for reason of self-defense, not guilty for reason of self-defense, what that comes out to say is that Leonard has been in prison since 1976 for aiding and abetting an act of self-defense. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Since then, we've had judges say all kinds of things. We had one appeals judge say that, come out and admit that the government was as responsible for what happened that day as AIM was. Another judge in one appeal came out and said that the government intimidated witnesses, fabricated evidence, and all these things, and still no new trial. Okay, what they're saying is that Leonard represents something to them, and it should represent something to us that is so important that none of us should stop until we free him. I've been working for Leonard since 1979, continuously. Those that know me know I'm part of the Northwest Network that organized over 63 rallies in 14 years. We will not quit. We will not surrender. Leonard is in bad health now, even possibly having cancer. He has diabetes. He has a bad heart. He's been in prison all these years with his constitutional rights denied, fair trial denied, everything that we think or they tell us that we should think this government, this country stands on. And I ask you one thing. Who does love America? Is it Leonard, who has done this for his people and stood strong for all these years? Or is it these people that put him in prison, these people that exploit us, that rob us, try to take everything, every right away from us? Wisconsin is a good example of that. They take everything. There's nothing that we have that they're not willing to try to take if they want it. Who loves America? Who loves the land? Who tries to keep it from being polluted? Them? Look at any industrial city and you answer that question. Well, to that I say, the people that should pack their goddamn bags and get the hell out of here is the ruling class and the government of the United States. And it's time for the people to take responsibility for their land and community. And we're going to keep working on this. May 21st is a regional march and rally. There are flyers back there, take as many as you can. Regional clemency rally for Leonard Peltier. Like I said, his health is real bad. We got to get him out now. And the only chance left, there's nothing about new trial or anything. We could prove that Leonard was sitting on Mars at the time and they wouldn't grant him a new trial. So we're going after a new clemency campaign. I was around working for Leonard in the last one. And I will admit, and maybe some people might be annoyed at me, to say I believe that if every person that believed in Leonard, said they supported Leonard, had come out and supported Leonard at that time, Leonard would be walking free, because we came very close. The fact that the FBI, in the first time in the history of the FBI, had 500 agents march on the White House against Leonard Peltier shows how worried they were. And everything that they've done since to smear Leonard. So we're starting a new Northwest campaign for clemency. And this rally is march and rally is very important, because we have to start off with a good, strong show of support. We need it getting out that people do still care about Leonard. Leonard is not just history. Leonard is now. And it's now that we need to free him, and it's now that we need your help. And all of you are far more important than somebody like me speaking about him, because I do this. This is what is expected of me. But if you all go back to your friends, your groups, your organizations, and say, here's a brother that we need to stand up for, and come out to Tacoma. I know it's 130 miles away. I just drove it today to be down here with you. That's kind of a pain, but we need that support. We need it. And in ending, I'd like to say that any of your movements, no matter what they are, can be faced with what Leonard has faced. If you happen to have something that they want, they will go at it any way they can. If you speak up against the things that they don't want you to speak up about, they will possibly come after you. So coming out in support of Leonard is not just coming out in support of the man Leonard, who is a great person. I've known him for a long time, and standing strong for all those years in prison is pretty incredible. It's not just about supporting the struggles that they were trying to suppress. It is about supporting yourselves, supporting your kids, their future, what kind of country this is. If you want this to be a country that we can love for the way it is run and operated, it depends on you. So coming out for Leonard on May 21st is not just for all the great causes, it's for each and every one of you. I wish to thank you very much for the well-being of all.
I'll try sitting. If you can't hear me, let me know and I'll stand up. So I'm Pete Bohmer, and I want to thank everybody for coming out here on a Saturday night. I've been asked to share my experience and knowledge of government repression tonight, not to scare you, but so we can deal with it and build stronger and more effective movements for social economic justice, local, nationally, and globally. I want to thank Adam Carpinelli and the Jericho movement for organizing this event. Before I get to my experiences, a few general comments. We live in a society that's very unequal and growing more so. Officially, more than 40 million people are below the poverty line, 14 million are officially unemployed, another 12 to 15 million have given up looking for work or working part-time and want to work full-time. 50 million people in the United States have no health insurance. Access to quality and affordable higher education is being taken away. Even more criminal is 2 million people the government has imprisoned, 1 million whom are African American and 400,000 Latino. Globally, we see a similar trend with more and more of the income and wealth in a few hands, hunger and poverty rampant, with less and less public services such as affordable education and healthcare. The environment globally and nationally is truly at risk. Private sector unions have been greatly weakened by a 30-year corporate offensive, and the aim of most of corporate America and the Republican Party and a lot of the Democrats is to now also destroy unions of government workers and to reduce the power of workers and their wages and benefits to privatize the public sector. Wisconsin, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and many other places are inspiring because people are standing up. They're losing their fear and changing the world in profound ways. We are living right now in 2011 in a world historic moment. Rebellion is in the air. I urge all of you to become even more part of this global uprising. What's happening today in 2011 in North Africa, in the Middle East, increasingly in the United States, reminds me some of the global uprisings of the 1960s, Vietnam, France, Mexico, the United States. Many of the gains that were won in the 60s in the US, such as the growing number of low-income students, of Black, Latino, Asian American, Native American students, also working-class whites in universities, the growth in college scholarships, some reduction in police brutality, better health and safety on the job, medical care for retired people, reductions in poverty, ending the U.S. war against Vietnam did not come from presidents or from above, but from people organizing and putting their bodies on the line, demanding change. The response by people in power in the United States was to meet some of the demands, for example, the end of legal discrimination, but not the end of poverty or the end of racism, but also to repress and attack in different ways individuals and movements working for reform and revolutionary change in their society. This is not to say that we didn't make some mistakes or that repression was the only cause of decline of many of these movements of the 60s and early 70s, but repression was a major factor. I do not want to romanticize the 60s and 70s. There were many courageous people who accomplished a lot, but it's important to remember for people who are younger here, most people aren't activists. And the needs are at least as pressing today for building movements that link the struggles against U.S. militarism and the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, with struggles for global justice, for economic and labor and social and gender and racial justice, for ending poverty, for immigrant rights, for taxing the wealthy, and against the budget cuts and repression. By sharing knowledge of the past, we can make our groups and movements much stronger today. Much organizing is already happening right now, but we all have responsibility to learn more about what's going on and act in ways big and small, individually and collectively, to create a world based on meeting human needs rather than one serving profits of the multinational corporations and their wealthy leaders. This is a very difficult but also exciting time to be alive, both globally and in the US. Although we're told by schools like Portland State, many other places, and also the media, we have the right to protest, to organize, to speak up. These rights have been and will be violated by those in power, the police, and the right wing. So with that as introduction, let me turn a little bit to my own experiences with the FBI and government repression. A lot of it dovetails what Arthur said, and I feel very honored to be on the same panel with him and also with Kent Ford, who has been an amazing activist in the past too. So I participated very actively in anti-Vietnam War movement and student organizing and student movements in the Boston area in the late 1960s. And I spent 45 days in a low security prison for this. I moved to San Diego in the fall of '70, where we met to teach economics at San Diego State University. I was very active in San Diego against the Vietnam War, both on and off campus, and in a lot of community organizing, against police brutality, against, we didn't call it gentrification, but against developers, and so on. Death threats, heavy surveillance, and arrests on false charges began against me in the spring of 1971. Harassment escalated in the summer and fall of '71, particularly after the Republican Convention announced it would be in then President Nixon's favorite city, San Diego, for the summer of '72. The effort to fire me from my job as an assistant professor of economics in San Diego State University intensified in '71, '72. The FBI visited my employer, San Diego State. There was complicity involved in the then government Reagan, the governor of California, to press openly political charges against me, such as I gave preference for admissions into my classes for women and students of color, a horrible crime like that. After 3 lengthy hearings, all of which ruled in my favor, and in spite of very large demonstrations, some in the thousands supporting me, the San Diego State University system still fired me, even though the same year I was voted the best teacher by the students of San Diego State. Even the Conservative American Economics Association ruled there was a case of political discrimination. But after a very lengthy court case where the union did actually work on my behalf, the AFT, the California Supreme Court ruled that San Diego State did not have to return my position. In the early '70s, in spite of repression, there was a very strong movement against the Vietnam War, with a growing involvement of active duty and ex-military, and that's very important to think about the importance today. And a very strong Chicano movement, both on the campus, such as the local mechas, the United Farm Workers, and also in the barrios or neighborhoods. There was a strong black movement in San Diego State, with many ex-prisoners who had been politicized in prison, playing a very, very important role. There was a San Diego-based movement that I was part of that planned protests in August of '72 for the scheduled Republican convention. We were planning massive, nonviolent, direct action, plus a lot of educating about struggles throughout the world. We had hookups set up with the Vietnamese to speak to people in San Diego. Because of this organizing, Nixon eventually moved the convention to Miami. I don't think it was corruption so much, it was the organizing, which many of the Watergate people had mentioned. However, they claimed it wasn't because of planned protests, although this was the reason. And I think a lesson from this is for all of us here, those in power will never admit that resistance and protest can lead to victories for those protesting, but it does, it often does. Remember this when you question whether active protest and resistance is futile. I've heard a lot of people say, look, I went to 2 or 3 demonstrations, Lenin's not free, so it's not worth it, etc. I think persistence, like Arthur talked about, wins, and we do have an effect. People in power will never admit it. All of the tactics that became identified as COINTELPRO were used against us. I will focus on what happened to me, but I was part of a larger movement who faced these attacks. For example, all of what I'm talking about also happened in San Diego to the Brown Berets, a Chicano group that was national and had a chapter in San Diego that was committed to Chicano rights and self-determination. In my case, it involved, and this has all been documented, coordination between the FBI, Nixon's Watergate team, the ones who broke in the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate Hotel, the San Diego police and sheriffs, and a fascist group funded and closely worked with the San Diego FBI office, which Arthur already mentioned, the Secret Army Organization, or SAO. First, a few words about COINTELPRO. I'm quoting, COINTELPRO was a program coordinated by the FBI to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize individuals and groups. It supposedly started in '68 and ended in April '71 when it was exposed through some very courageous, smart people who broke into the FBI files in Media, Pennsylvania. Although COINTELPRO officially ended in '71, it has continued, though in a somewhat less extreme form, with the name up to September 11 of 2001. Since then, we've gone backwards and towards more police powers, infiltration, and framing of activists. Much of the Patriot Act and the increased powers being given to the FBI is the legalization of COINTELPRO-like tactics, whose primary target today is Arab American and the Muslim community, but it's also providing weapons to be used against all those working for social change, such as the raids in Chicago and Minneapolis last year of solidarity activists. A common tactic in the 1970s, which is again being repeated now, was calling people before a grand jury for supposed knowledge of a crime and then asking them to name the meetings they attended, other attendees, discussions, etc. If people refused to testify, they were given immunity, and if they continued to refuse to give names or snitch on other people, they were given contempt of court and often asked to serve for the length of the grand jury, sometimes for a year or even longer. They're again repeating these oppressive tactics today. It's important for people, if you are called to a grand jury, to not talk and to not cooperate with these grand jury fishing expeditions. They want to destroy our solidarity. A lot of times, whether it's people being tortured, captured, I think destroying solidarity is a key aim, and that's what these grand juries are about. We need to support our comrades called before grand juries. Brian Glick, in his excellent pamphlet, which I recommend, The War at Home on COINTELPRO, focuses on 4 methods used against U.S. activists. I will give a few examples of these 4 methods from my own experience, okay? One is infiltrate groups, okay? So although no group I worked in San Diego planned or carried out any violent actions, and many groups that I worked with were purely educational, organizing events like tonight, 20 people I knew in these groups, and I never say this, so I'm 99 to 100% sure, 20 people I knew in these groups turned out to be police or FBI agents or informers. Many worked for both the San Diego police or sheriffs and the FBI. They worked hard to cause divisions among individuals or groups, for example, like in Wounded Knee, like the Schaefers. Some, but not all, were provocateurs. So it's not true that agents or informants are always provocateurs. Some were, others just took information and did a lot of other stuff. We can discuss it more in discussion. So one is infiltrate groups. Second, psychological warfare. The FBI visited my employer, I already mentioned San Diego State, to try to get me fired. They visited landlords where I lived. In one place, a house a few of us lived, they raised the rent from $200 to $800, which was a lot of money at that time. Yeah. And the landlord did admit that it was the FBI told them we had to do it or he'd be in a lot of trouble. They opened that, and this is all stuff they've admitted to, so other stuff I think happened too. They opened my mail. They definitely monitored all of my checking accounts, so just stuff for people to know. We got anonymous phone calls, also many, about people being agents who I'm sure, looking back on it, weren't. So I think it's really important, don't call somebody an agent or a snitch just because you don't like them or you hear something like that unless you're sure. That just destroys people, destroys movements. Okay. Harassment, thirdly, this is again my experience, harassment through the legal system. I had many, many arrests in San Diego, over 10. I usually beat the charges, but a lot of time and energy was spent defending myself. An example why I didn't beat the charges, and one of the cases I was innocent. I was sentenced for obstructing a train with war supplies, and with a friend and fellow activist, Peter Bohmer, who we both got sentenced, and I did 90 days in Chino State Prison in 1973. Everybody testified against me. There were 4 undercover. They actually were San Diego sheriffs who had infiltrated various progressive groups, and then they surfaced to testify against us in the trial against me. And fourth, state-sponsored violence. Okay, this is the 4th thing Brian Glick talks about. The FBI-sponsored groups, and authors suffered a lot of this also, where they did fire bombings. I can't say how many times tires of my car were slashed. Over 20 death threats to my house. they put out a wanted poster on me that was distributed 300 copies in San Diego in '71. The Secret Army Organization, a group where all the money came from FBI funds, and it was led by an FBI informant. They shot into a collective I lived with. The bullet permanently injured a woman, Paula Tharp, who's a nurse, who was hit in the elbow and permanently injured. Howard Barry Godfrey, a well-paid FBI informant, head of the Secret Army Organization, admitted almost a year later in court to driving the car to my house in Ocean Beach, San Diego, the night of the shooting. He claimed another SAO member did the actual shooting. After shooting into my house, other FBI agents in San Diego covered up the crime and hid the evidence, such as the gun used in the shooting, which had actually been stolen from friends of mine who were doing GI organizing. And again, a lot of it was tied to Richard Held. I won't go over what Arthur Reddy said. After the shooting into my house and many other stuff, this is 1972, threats and harassment continued. But what happened in the middle of '72, after the Secret Army Organization, they began threatening liberals and radicals. For example, they put out a poster saying that the mayor of San Diego, rather than burying me under the ground, was coddling people like me. And they also bombed the pornography because they said pornography was a communist threat. The San Diego police, who knew about them, they demanded the FBI reveal their informants in the Secret Army Organization, and they were arrested in '72 on numerous charges. Government lawyers hired by the FBI claimed various privileges, such as not having to reveal much of their behavior. The full FBI involvement in this attempted murder never came out, although one FBI agent was forced to resign, and a few others, I guess, were suspended for a while. Godfrey, the FBI informant and provocateur in the Secret Army Organization, didn't go to prison, although 2 members did actually go to prison. So what's the relevance of this history? I mean, that's obviously relevant to me, but why am I sharing this? First, COINTELPRO supposedly ended in '71, but everything that was part of COINTELPRO continued against me for many years after that. For example, phone taps, again, which we found, opening my mail, the Red Squad of San Diego Police Department visiting employers and potential employers many times. Like, I would get jobs and I'd work a few days, and then all of a sudden they would say, "We don't want you." Most of what I'm talking about now has been revealed through Freedom of Information Act requests that the ACLU did for me. But the FBI criminalities continue against other groups and individuals, such as the American Indian Movement, La Raza Unida Party of Texas, CISPES, Judy Barry, again, who Arthur mentioned, Earth First, and radical environmental and animal rights activists, and recent protesters, against the Democratic and Republican National Convention, and many others. So we cannot accept their claim that COINTELPRO ended in April '71. It continues today without that name. Look at, again, the 2010 raids, for example, in Minneapolis and Chicago. Key repression continues to be most fierce against Black, Chicano, Native American, other movements of color. The FBI target, for example, Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King, although they was totally nonviolent pacifist movements. Although not as murderous and common, repression is also used against whites who challenge this oppressive global capitalist system. COINTELPRO and police agencies attacked most directly the Black Liberation Movement, Chicano, Puerto Rican, American Indian Movement, but it doesn't stop there. All of us who stand up for justice and solidarity become the enemy of those who run this country. In building movements for liberation, it's absolutely necessary that we support our sisters and brothers who've been victims of political repression, and we support in ways small and big political prisoners such as Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's on death row, Leonard Peltier, and others less well known. Free all political prisoners. The Jericho movement deserves a lot of credit for this continuing support so people don't become even more isolated. To weaken this repressive apparatus, we should learn about it and educate the left broadly about the limited nature of U.S. democracy. COINTELPRO behavior by the government requires secrecy because it so clearly violates the rhetoric of democracy and civil rights. To me, it's analogous to the secrecy that the World Trade Organization, the IMF, World Bank, and multinational corporations require in order to impose the economic violence on people around the world. Let's intensify the pressure to expose these international organizations as well as the repressive apparatus at home and sponsored by the U.S. abroad. Again, the most vicious government attacks today are, the U.S. government, organized government torture centers in Afghanistan and Guantanamo, which Obama has continued. Also, the attacks on immigrants, mainly Muslim, Arab, Arab American, often held in secret with no rights, beaten and deported with no evidence whatsoever. Anti-communism was used as the excuse to justify much of the repression in the 50s to the 70s. So was calling somebody a black or Chicano or Native American militant. Check out the evidence. The government and the media can and do lie. Not all the time, but be skeptical when you hear charges against someone that when we hear they're terrorists or support terrorists or hear movements slandered. Support, for example, Mumba Ford, who basically gave money to a charity in Pakistan and has got a 13-year sentence, I believe, for it. The labels anarchists and anarchism are also used falsely to political movements and of individuals as mindlessly violent, who supposedly aim to create chaos and disorder and destruction. Learn about the Patriot Act, protest against it, prevent its extension, demand it repealed, and support those who are being detained and deported. Also learn about the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force and resist Portland's police participation in it. So in moving toward conclusion, let me talk about some guidelines based on my experiences, okay? So infiltration will happen in movements. But if we're so paranoid about people joining our groups, those in power, and remain very small and isolated, I often get anonymous phone calls, even in the last year, about people who I was told were police agents, who I'm sure aren't. If people act suspiciously in a group you work with, a trusted person group would check into the person's background. That's usually how I found out people, where people have something that just doesn't follow. You listen to them, and you check into their background. Two, I talked about psychological warfare. So try to build kind of principle unity. Basically, don't believe everything you hear or believe about other activists or groups. Check out rumors and limit gossip. The legal system. Third, don't talk to the FBI, the police, or grand jury investigating activists. Develop relations with movement lawyers, such as the National Lawyers Guild, who will defend and advise you. Build support through petitions, through broad coalitions with people you have difference with but oppose government repression. Also, oppose and who will work with you against the spying done more and more by private security firms. Try to get favorable stories in the media. Get support from politicians if you can. Dealing with right-wing violence. Make public harassment by the right wing. Have duplicates of all of your records and files. Support each other. Work with mainstream groups to oppose them. I think one of the problems I had in San Diego, we didn't reach out enough to some of the more mainstream groups to try to support us. For example, in 2006, a Nazi group called the National Socialist Movement, I don't know how many people know about them. Many of the people from Portland, they threatened my life many times in Olympia. And I said a lot of people were from Portland too, and Portland does have history of these white supremacist Nazi groups. And we try to build a pretty broad coalition. And again, we need to build broad coalitions for civil liberties and against white supremacist groups. It's important to be aware of what the government has done and is doing today, but not to be paralyzed into inaction from fear. If the fear of repression frightens us and others into inaction, those in power have been successful. Our best defense is a good offense, to continue to speak up and act in many different ways and strategically to build alternatives and fight for power. In acting for justice, do not be constrained by the law, but consider the consequences of all actions. Don't try to get people to do what they don't want to do. Be honest, although of course details may have to be kept secret in direct actions. Build movements for justice that cross generations. Youth and students are key, but so are older people who haven't sold out. We can learn from each other. We didn't do enough of this building cross-generational movements in the 60s and 70s. We didn't learn enough from those, for example, who faced repression during the McCarthy witch hunts in the 50s. We need to build multi-generational movements and groups. Young people tend to be more courageous, more energetic, maybe willing to take more risks, which is important. Students and young people have played a major role all over the world in liberation movements. Check out Egypt or Libya today, for example. Older people, veterans of movements that are not resting on their laurels and and just claiming to follow them because they did something 40 years ago, and if they're not demanded to lead, can make important contributions by sharing their experience and knowledge. Age is one of the many divides we need to overcome. I know I've talked about a lot of events from a long time ago, but I want to conclude by linking them more closely to the present. One of the reasons in looking back on my period in San Diego and in Boston in the 60s and 70s, I believe I faced depression, was always trying to build unity among different groups. Community, campus, anti-war, women, Chicano, black, worker, young and old, immigrant, non-immigrant, documented, undocumented. Challenge racism and racial inequality whatever we do. If we're to build a decent, humane society in the United States, which I think is possible and we will, we need to build coalitions, alliances, far stronger than we did in the 60s and 70s. We should name what we are facing as destructive and exploitative global capitalist system. We need to challenge all of the isms of racism, sexism, heterosexism, as we work for a goal of a different society. We also need to learn about and develop a vision of what kind of society we'd like to live in, and share this knowledge beyond just the people here with our friends, neighbors, fellow students, and many more. We should be courageous and bold, but not be arrogant or act morally superior to others. The more support we have, the more we reach out, the more difficult it is to isolate and attack us. The role of the law and courts and police is set up and used to maintain this unjust, racist, and patriarchal imperialist economic system. That was true in the 60s, it's also true today. Let's create a system where the dignity of all human beings living in harmony with the environment is put at the center, where good food, adequate shelter, quality health care, and education are rights of all. Our goal is justice, not legality. Voting, Obama, lobbying will not end in justice. Saying this does not mean proving how radical and militant we are, but how many windows we break or rocks we throw at the police. Those are tactics, not strategies. We must consider what's effective. Are we building a growing movement to educate, to organize and win, rather than just expressing our anger at injustice or trying to show how radical and macho we are? Repression also, my third point in concluding, is very real and serious, but we should not exaggerate its severity. For example, it's worse than many other countries such as Libya, Palestine, and people continue to resist injustice and oppression there. We can also resist it here. So let's not exaggerate it, but it's very real in reality. We can best honor those who've been murdered by a government and their agents, such as Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers in Chicago in '69, Ruben Salazar, killed during the Chicano moratorium in a protest against the Vietnam War in '70 in LA, the students at Kent and Jackson State, for example, in May '70, and thousands of others, not by mourning, but by organizing, by building movements that put into practice solidarity across borders that are inclusive in all the important ways: class, gender, race, sexual orientation, immigrant age. I resist boldly and courageously all forms of inequality and environmental degradation. We need to challenge, stop U.S. aggression abroad, and work to overthrow this insane profit system where farm workers make $7 an hour and poisoned by pesticides, and over 2 million people are in prison, where immigrants are being scapegoated for the economic crisis. Check out, and I'm sure people know here about anti-immigrant law 1070 in Arizona, which many other states are trying to copy. Let's build a society based on cooperation, sustainability, where work is meaningful, and production is organized around need and not greed, where global poverty is abolished, where the earth is cherished and not destroyed, and equality in all forms and democracy become reality and not rhetoric. It may sound like dreaming, but it's more realistic than thinking that the U.S. capitalist system continue the way it's been going for hundreds of years into the future. Thanks for listening. Power to the people.